people building within Bitcoin, especially building on stacks. How have you seen the process for developer attraction within this ecosystem? Because I know, I think we talked about this in the past, which is like Ethereum was really built to bring more programmability on chain and try to advance what Bitcoin started, but in a more programmable way and giving people more opportunity to build unique and valuable tools and ways that people can interact. So what does that look like within the Bitcoin and the stacks ecosystems? Because I know it's generally outside of EVM compatible, it's really hard to attract developers in the blockchain space. Solana had a really rough time at first. Rust is a pretty common language, but it was hard for people to really understand it and start building within the Web3 ecosystem using Rust. So first of all, welcome, Jonas, Andre. I want to first thank you guys for joining us today and helping us learn a little bit more about stacks. If you guys don't mind, can you give us just a quick background on who you are and how you're engaged in the stacks ecosystem? I know it's a little bit different. For most of our interviews, it's like somebody that works at a specific protocol, and stacks is very different in the sense that it's very truly decentralized in how everything is built and operated and maintained. So I'd love like a quick intro from each of you and what role you play within your organization and within stacks.
Sure. I'll kick it off. So I am with Hero Systems. Hero is one of the core entities of the stacks ecosystem. Our focus is dev tooling. As you mentioned, Feroz, stacks is a genuinely decentralized ecosystem with over 30 independent entities and growing. And there are, 4 or 5 kind of core entities. Hero is one of them. So I'm on the leadership team of Hero. But like I mentioned in the past, because we're so decentralized, the way we kind of do our best to operate and kind of as one aligned team is we form different working groups based on function. So I spend a lot of time leading the stacks ecosystem business development working group.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, sir. Andre, over to you.
On my end, I'm the head of product at a company called Bitcoin L2 Labs. So we're a Stacks core development company. So that means that we're actually contributing to the Stacks protocol itself. And we actually built SBTC, which is our Bitcoin-backed asset that you can use in DeFi. Before this, I spent a couple of years at the Stacks Foundation. I've been in crypto since 2017, mostly working in the Bitcoin space, a little bit of time working in the zero knowledge space as well, and also as an investor before that.
Nice. I feel like that's how most of us start, is as an investor and then slowly growing into the ecosystems that we vibe with. It sounds like you. Yeah.
No, I was going to say you slowly, go down the rabbit hole and want to contribute to the projects and that you find most interesting and compelling.
Yeah, exactly. And you went straight into stacks. So you started in Bitcoin, and the first like real ecosystem you worked in was stacks, and you just you've grown within the ecosystem that way, it seems like. So what was the process like for bringing in all of these now 30 plus different organizations that all kind of contribute and work together? How have you seen that evolution? I'm genuinely curious because this is like what I would want from a blockchain ecosystem, of like how I would want it to grow, but most of them don't operate like that. It's usually fairly centralized and then kind of slowly decentralizes a little bit on some aspects. So for stacks within Bitcoin, which is obviously probably the community that really respects decentralization and being permissionless more than any other Web3 ecosystem today. How was that evolution in terms of growing the core contributors and the organizations that all play
it's a good question. I'll maybe kick it off and then turn over to Jonas in a minute. But I guess for context here, I actually participated in Stacks' Reg A offering back in 2019. So I first joined the ecosystem as an investor and kind of a passive contributor. And then when the mainnet launched in January of 2021, I really understood sort of the vision for building on Bitcoin, this idea that Bitcoin is this base layer. And if we're building the decentralized web, we're building more resilient systems. We want to ultimately build on the most solid foundation. And that was Bitcoin. And at the time, building on Bitcoin was really contrarian. right? I think that it wasn't commonplace the way that it is now. Um, but really, when we look at the approach that Stacks has taken in it, it was very deliberately decentralized from day one. And so, from that initial Reggae offering and ultimately doing the token launch, even looking at how how the raise was distributed amongst the ecosystem, like there wasn't one large entity that that like received the funds and basically was responsible for stewardship of the protocol and the ecosystem. It was divided out across a number of different core entities, and so I think from the onset of the project, decentralization has been at its core. I think being influenced from the ethos of Bitcoin, and you see it that manifests itself in terms of the actual governance and the way that the ecosystem is set up to some of the design principles that have gone into making the Stacks protocol as robust and resilient, and really thinking about the right ways to incorporate Bitcoin into that structure. So that's kind of how I've seen it. But yeah, Jonas, I don't know from your perspective if you had anything to add there.
Yeah, you mentioned the Reggae offering, which was kind of how we kicked things off in terms of fundraising back in the ICO days. And the project then was called Blockstack. Some OGs may have heard of Blockstack. So, I mean, our creator, Munib Ali, has been working on figuring out how to build on the Bitcoin base layer for over a decade. We did the Reggae offering. That's essentially a qualified offering with the SEC, collaborating with the SEC. We did that to be conservative and safe, and because we wanted retail investors in the United States to have access to this project. That's also the theme of decentralization, right? So we did that raise. It was open to anybody in the US. And then after the raise, there were several years of kind of R&D, and the mainnet launch happened in January of 2021. And that was sort of like the first release of smart contracts for Bitcoin. But ahead of that mainnet launch, we said, okay, we had been going down this path, but, we believe in decentralization. The STX token is a gas asset. It's not a security by any means. And to kind of, walk the walk, Blockstack, which was one entity in the very beginning, split up into about 6 different entities. And then the ecosystem just started growing organically from there. And the final thing I'll say about this is one of the things that's unique about the Stacks ecosystem is that you see a lot of other ecosystems where, there's a central entity with a shitload of money and they're just like throwing around incentives, bringing in teams. And a lot of times, when the incentives run out, it's not that sustainable. Yeah. Stacks is an organically growing community of true Bitcoin believers, right? People who we believe that not only is Bitcoin sound money and the best money ever invented, but it is the ultimate ledger of truth. And like Andre said, it's the base layer that the next generation internet and financial system just needs to be built on. So you just have people who feel that in their hearts that are coming in and building it, and that are missionaries, right? And that's what really drives the decentralization and the growth.
That's awesome. So I actually have a question. When you talk about people building within Bitcoin, especially building on Stacks, how have you seen the process for developer attraction within this ecosystem? Because I know, I think we talked about this in the past, which is like Ethereum was really built to bring more programmability on chain and try to advance what Bitcoin started, but in a more programmable way, and giving people more opportunity to build unique and valuable, tools and ways that people can interact. So what does that look like within the Bitcoin and the Stacks ecosystems? Because I know it's generally outside of EVM compatible, it's really hard to attract developers in the blockchain space. Solana had a really rough time at first. Rust is a pretty common language, but it was hard for people to really understand it and start building within the Web3 ecosystem using Rust. So how does Stacks try to answer that question to try to attract more developers and make it easier for people to build on Bitcoin, which is obviously like, that's the goal. This whole industry blew up because people wanted to really expand Bitcoin and ended up just offering a bunch of their own independent solutions that were external. Stacks went the opposite way and was like, no, we're going to build directly on top of Bitcoin. We don't want to build something completely separate, but Bitcoin itself doesn't quite have the capabilities for what we need. So what does that look like in terms of attracting developers and making it easier for them to build within the Bitcoin
Yeah,
ecosystem?
it's a good question. I think over the years, Stacks have done a really good job of attracting missionary builders. So it's a lot of developers that are aligned with the ethos of Bitcoin around decentralization and security and the role of the Bitcoin network itself. And so we did a really good job of basically attracting like-minded people to the community and kind of nurturing it at a time when the rest of the Bitcoin community had kind of gone a different direction, right? There was this whole maximalist culture. They were very resistant to change. And so I think Stacks kind of positioned itself as being the opposite of that, where it was kind of like a breath of fresh air, where you could come and actually start to experiment with building new things on Bitcoin. And it really, let's say like the key moment was when Ordinals launched shortly after the Taproot upgrade, where, before that it had been really a contrarian bet, to take at that stage. But then there was like this light bulb moment where, people really started to recognize the importance of the Bitcoin network being the most liquid, the most secure, and basically, because Stacks had been building on the Bitcoin network, a lot of our teams were able to really kind of contribute in a meaningful way. So, before we started this conversation, we were talking about Xverse and Leather, some of the popular Bitcoin wallets that are out there that have become dominant in the ordinal space. These were all incubated in the Stacks ecosystem. And so when you look at that, I think it really helped us to be able to find that sort of product market fit early on, and then be able to attract those users back to the Stacks network itself.
Nice.
Totally. And I think there are some underlying themes that have just always been present that have pulled developers in. Like, if you think about the way Ethereum evolved, it was like, let's build this ecosystem of decentralized applications, and kind of the currency within that ecosystem was ETH, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, well, if this is the currency, maybe this is money. Maybe this is ultrasound money, right? Yep. And, that the traction there is debatable. With Bitcoin, it's like Bitcoin is money, and let's start with you start with the money and you build everything on top of that. And I think that's just, that just connects with a certain mindset. Plus, you have all these people that are Bitcoin enthusiasts, Bitcoiners, and you're looking at the market and you're saying, okay, BTC, the asset, it's arguably established product market fit as a store of value. It is like, as Manib coined the phrase, it's the apex predator asset, like in the industry. Yet, just predominantly all the usage is happening through centralized exchanges. Like when you really break it down, and that just doesn't make sense, right? And so I think you have these themes that like result in a gravitational pull for certain types of builders to come into the Stacks ecosystem.
That's interesting. It's funny you mentioned that, because I actually started in ETH. I was in tech for a while. I worked for Samsung for years. We even launched a crypto wallet within the phones, and only Bitcoin, Ethereum, and I think Tron were like the 3 supported networks within that wallet. And even then, I'm like selling basically crypto wallets within these phones, and I was still not really bought in to the concept. And then Ethereum, meme coin trading really was what caught my eye. That's how I started investing in the ecosystem. And Bitcoin came later, just because it didn't seem as fun. I was looking for something fun as opposed to just innovative. And like Bitcoin started that trend. Ethereum opened it up for more people to build more fun, cool, randomly speculative trading things and games and all types of random stuff. Whereas now I look at it, Bitcoin has kind of evolved to grab a lot of that attention and bring some people back into the original, the OG Bitcoin ecosystem by allowing some pieces of that, right? So we talked about ordinals. Now they introduced runes. You've got BRC20s. There's like different ways that people have tried to evolve the Bitcoin ecosystem to keep up. without going too far, without expanding to the point where it's no longer serving its core purpose. So in that sense, how much do you see Bitcoin or even stacks really expanding the use cases from a store of value, really seeing it as money and becoming more speculative, or allowing for more types of like unique things that you can do on some other chains within the Bitcoin ecosystem?
Yeah, I'll just say that I think it's absolutely critical. And so when I look at, so I also spent a lot of time, over the years, on Ethereum buying NFTs and things like that. And one of the things that Ethereum got really well during last cycle was that all of the NFTs were denominated in ETH, right? So for as far as Ethereum's claim on money as a unit of account, that's pretty important, right? And so we hadn't seen that for a while, and people were actually using ETH to pay for digital goods through NFTs. And so, when I look at a lot of these activities starting to come back to Bitcoin with Ordinals and with runes and BRC20s, it does a number of things for the network. I think one, it creates like a Bitcoin native ecosystem or economy where like NFTs and digital goods are actually priced in Bitcoin. You're seeing transactions on the network starting to pick up. So there's real economic activity happening on the network, which obviously creates this economic flywheel that, these people are paying fees to Bitcoin miners, which sustains the whole incentive mechanism of the Bitcoin network. And it just creates a more fun environment for Bitcoin where you can, people like to collect things, people like to trade meme coins and things like that. So it kind of changes the culture a little bit of the people that are in Bitcoin. So overall, when I look at the impact that runes and ordinals have had, it's been massively positive for the Bitcoin space. And I think it's resulted in a shift in terms of the overall culture that I think we're going to see the effects of over time.
Totally. For us, it's funny that you said like ETH was just more fun because, one of the mantras over the last couple of years has been like, make Bitcoin fun again. Right. So it's an important part of the engine of a great culture. And then on the DeFi side, it's like most people will tell you that, not everyone, but most people that work in the industry will tell you like they got in because of Bitcoin, right? Like it was some connection to Bitcoin, and across every ecosystem and every foundation we talk to and friends and partners, like we're all kind of Bitcoiners, right? In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So it's like, if Bitcoin is sound money and we're building this new financial system, like why wouldn't you have sound money like power this new decentralized ecosystem too? It's just so logical. So I think on both sides, from the art, and that other really important cultural stuff, and then just the clear logic of building this new decentralized economy on the base layer of Bitcoin, with Bitcoin as the primary asset. It's just it's very intuitive.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Like, I know recently, this is one thing that I've learned in terms of I've done marketing for a long time, right? I started in traditional tech, now in blockchain and different types of crypto ecosystems. And one thing, like when I'm traveling to conferences, or whether it's family or friends, or like Lyft drivers, when I get to new places, that's one thing that people always ask is like, oh, how can I invest? Like, I don't know anything about like cryptocurrencies or blockchain, but I know it's blowing up. There's a lot of stuff in the news and I hear a lot of things. I know people lose a ton of money. Like how can I safely invest? What's the next coin that's going to make me a millionaire? And my answer always defaults to just DCA into Bitcoin, dude. Like if you don't want to learn, if you don't want to spend a ton of time, like, on online forums and on Twitter and on all these other places where people are talking about things, just DCA into Bitcoin. Like there's very easy traditional ways now to be able to do that. And you don't really have to worry. Just long term, it'll average out and you'll end up doing fine because Bitcoin is not going anywhere anytime soon. And it's become so easy for people to use. And now people are starting to understand that concept. Like it took me going to Ethereum and then getting into Bitcoin, even though I was a tech centric person. The only node I run is a Bitcoin node now. And I started doing that. Like I bought a mini PC off of Amazon a couple of years ago. And I was like, I want to learn how to make my own node, because everything else I just use through normal RPCs and wallets. I have no control over what's really happening or where it's being routed. For any Bitcoin transactions I want to do, I can literally just run it through my own node. Like, I'm not making any money on it. I'm not mining, Bitcoin off of one little mini PC. So like, I'm not going to get rich off of it, but it really opened up. It was like the door for me to learn more about the technical aspect of it and about like being a part of that ecosystem, right? Like, even if it's not really adding a ton of value to run one node, it gives me some value. I learned something, and I still have a node. I am one of those nodes now within the ecosystem. And that feels really, really cool. I don't have to be an engineer to take part in the ecosystem. I really just have to want to be interested and want to learn. And that's, I feel like, is kind of what got me in, getting into ordinals, getting into runes, and then saying, you know what, I want to make sure that I have as much control in Bitcoin. That's the core ethos. So I want to really be a part of this ecosystem. And that, like, it sounds like that's how Stacks grew, was like people that are just like, I want to contribute and really be a part of this ecosystem and help it grow. And so that's where it started. And it seems like it's blown up like crazy over the past few years. I know this has probably been quoted a million times, but Stacks was listed, I think, number 7 in Electric Capital as like the fastest growing ecosystems. Do you still see that same momentum? Was that like in that, short window in time, like it hit that? Or is that something that's a consistent growth in terms of mindshare, developer attention, just general community attention on the Stacks ecosystem? Like, how do you see that trend of attention on the Stacks ecosystem? And I kind of jumped around there a little bit, but like, I'm just,
Yeah, no.
anyways.
Well, first thing I'll say is that I completely resonate with your journey, Feroz. So, I think running a node is an important part of some of people's like educational process into the Bitcoin space. And I've mine set up on Umbrel, and I think that's a an important
Yeah.
important part of the process here. And yeah, I think that a lot of the developer growth in the Stacks ecosystem has come from really deliberate initiatives from the Stacks community and the Stacks Foundation, really to focus on developer education, being really thoughtful around how to engage and build a developer community with the sort of resources that are available, hackathons, just like being available for developers and things like that. And so, I think that Stacks has the largest Bitcoin native developer ecosystem. So the number of applications and teams that are actually building these sorts of apps on mainnet right now. So we've absolutely seen that growth sort of continue, and I think that the Electric Capital report was just another good data point for that.
Yeah. And so that was the most recent Electric Capital report from 2024. But I think just generally, besides, like Andre said, all kinds of initiatives, and the Stacks Foundation is doing a really great job with attracting more developers in a lot of creative ways. I think just generally, like, the momentum around Bitcoin and the increasing Bitcoin dominance and the idea that you can actually build on Bitcoin, which 2 years ago just didn't exist. There's just like natural momentum, and it's an easier sell to developers. So there are a lot of factors at play there. So yeah, I think there's organic momentum, and then just good execution by the foundation and other entities.
Yeah. Recently, I've heard a lot of, and this is internally, like here at Anchor, we've worked on, we call it BSI, which is Bitcoin secured infrastructure. So there's a lot of different ways that people are either building on Bitcoin, building L2s on Bitcoin, incorporating Bitcoin as a security layer into other external protocols. Like, there's a ton of attention back on Bitcoin right now. One of the terms that one of my good friends uses a lot is BTC-Fi, which, I mean, literally it's just DeFi. It's just on Bitcoin in various different ways. And it's become like its own category now. Like, we've got DeFi. When you say DeFi, you're not talking about Ethereum or Solana or any one of the other 1,000 ecosystems where people can trade and there is economic activity happening. But for Bitcoin, there's a specific term and an entire category now just for DeFi on Bitcoin, and in various ways that's being built out. Do you, just curious, like, do you see that as being the next frontier of really bringing more trading activity and more ways for people to participate in the DeFi ecosystem on Bitcoin? Do you see that expanding in some way to incorporate more aspects, or like how do you see that happening, and how do you feel about the term BTC-Fi?
I'll defer to Andre, because I think he in the product trenches, he's got a great perspective on this. But I'll just say, like, that's why we're here. like the question you just asked is like the very reason why we're here, to basically truly enable Bitcoin to be the center of this financial universe and economy, but enable it to be deployed on decentralized rails without compromising the core ethos of decentralization and security. So yeah, Andre, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think we have a lot of data that shows that people are viewing Bitcoin as really pristine collateral, the best sort of collateral that exists. And so, what does that mean? I think it means that people want to be able to earn a yield on their Bitcoin, and they want to be able to borrow against it. And so, we're really seeing, a lot of use cases aimed at these initial categories initially. And I think kind of the vision is that similar to the way that we saw DeFi develop on Ethereum, getting the building up the liquidity for Bitcoin and DeFi, creating these sorts of initial use cases. Once you have that in place, then you can potentially start to explore other use cases as well, and create that sort of flywheel. But getting a robust DeFi ecosystem around Bitcoin, I think, is the first step to really enabling a lot of these broader use cases.
I think another interesting lens on all this is if you look at what's going on in TradFi and sort of the TradFiization of Bitcoin, right? Like where everybody is just on board now all of a sudden, right? Yeah. That like Bitcoin is, their customers are demanding access to Bitcoin, and there are all these different financial products. Besides the ETFs, there are new types of products being rolled out. And that's great for like the price of BTC and the demand on this scarce asset. But the whole point of this is to sort of cut out the middlemen and the gatekeepers. So like, I think it's natural that this is happening, because this is where a lot of the action is today. And it's just, there's less friction. You can do things with TradFi infrastructure if you're not worried about centralization. But I think this is just foreshadowing. Everything that we're seeing in TradFi is foreshadowing what we're ultimately going to see on decentralized rails. And not just because of like the principles of decentralization, because a lot of people really don't give a shit about that. Like many do, many don't. But because of the economics, I mean, the margins and cutting out the middlemen, like it's just inevitable. So I think I like to look at what's happening in traditional finance around Bitcoin as kind of an interesting foreshadow of what's to come in DeFi.
Now, how do you feel in like, I feel like maybe this is just me, but that feels like the antithesis of like, that's the opposite of what I know. A lot of people don't really care about decentralization as much as some of the ecosystem does, but like, that's what really first grew my interest. That's how I really explain the value for people like my wife and friends and family that are like, you've been in crypto and blockchain stuff for years now. Like, I still don't understand why. And my answer generally is because the decentralization aspect of it really puts the power back in the people's hands. There's no one Federal Reserve or one government or one body that's centralized that's deciding how much of this money exists or what this money is worth or what it can be used for. It's truly decentralized. That puts us like, this is literally the future of how societies should be operating. Nothing should be in the control of one small group of people. And it feels like the more we champion decentralized entities coming in, it's allowing access to people that haven't traditionally, engaged in the ecosystem to finally get a piece of it. But also it's just centralized entities now getting more and more and more, like amassing more Bitcoin, which, equals to them having more power within the Bitcoin ecosystem, which like, isn't that the opposite of what we should be looking to do? Isn't that like the opposite of where we were trying to go with the entire concept of Bitcoin? Like, I don't know. I'm just curious. Like that's where my brain goes. Like logically, that's how my brain works. How do you feel about that?
It's an interesting tension for sure. Right. And I think in some ways, it's like a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. And I think it's part of a natural progression. Like I just said, I think like the fact that like Bitcoin is getting so much airtime in the media, and there's so much demand coming from like all kinds of different stakeholders in the traditional world. Again, it's good for the BTC, the asset, in some ways. I mean, and it's like you have different types of Bitcoiners. You have Bitcoiners that are just total number go up Bitcoiners, and they're just totally focused on sort of the Bitcoin treasury. And again, I'm not complaining about that, but I think like I said, I just think this is a natural progression of an incredible innovation, and over time, it's going to play out where just based on like natural economic momentum and margins, the best opportunities are ultimately going to be on chain. That's my view.
Yeah,
true.
It's a really good question. We're definitely seeing the financialization of Bitcoin right now. And, we see that obviously in the ETFs, which have, I think, surpassed around $100 billion in market cap as of today. But we're seeing that in even some of the demand for the products that we're launching in the Stacks ecosystem, around yield bearing products and needing to basically cater to this more traditional financial ecosystem. And I think that there is a tension there, and I think that might have to it might change the way that we like approach certain things, but ultimately, I think Bitcoin does give access to everybody in ways that they didn't have it before. And so even if we're seeing, more of these sorts of products with, just more like qualified custodians, people still have the ability to self-custody their own Bitcoin, to run their own node. And so, I think that to an extent, probably this path towards hyper Bitcoinization getting integrated into the existing financial system, like it was probably inevitable. And we still have kind of the fundamental aspects that make the system decentralized. But, I definitely see the tension continuing to grow there. And yeah, it will be interesting to see how it plays out.
All right. I think there's really no right answer to that question, right? Like if we want adoption, we're going to kind of have to give way to a lot of these centralized entities to play that middleman and give access to people that are never going to run their own node or don't really care about, decentralization or self-custody. Like it is what it is. It's a natural progression.
And just to quickly add to Andre's take, like ultimately, like the real value proposition of Bitcoin is for people all over this world that are suffering from corrupt governments debasing the currency that they're forced to use. So inflationary environments, and then authoritarian environments where people are worried about their assets being seized. And so, like, unfortunately, that's only growing. So like Andre said, like there's still going to be growing use and demand for what Satoshi really created Bitcoin for.
It's such a good point. Like Bitcoin is a global permissionless financial system that offers unprecedented access to the best form of savings technology that exists today, which can empower, I think, billions of people around the world who have not had access to these sorts of basic banking and financial services. So it offers a significant improvement for the vast majority of the world's population. But I think when we look at like crossing the chasm and sort of what it looks like to actually enter into global adoption, I do think there's a lot of people in this country that are not going to that are going to access Bitcoin through their bank accounts, because that's what they have, and they're not going to learn new technologies. And I think that basically having this sort of TradFi wrapper around Bitcoin to be able to provide those people access, it's just a part of it, but it doesn't dilute sort of the core value proposition that we're seeing broadly across the network.
Got it. I love that answer. So I want to dig in a little bit to SBTC. It's a recent release. I know Stacks operates on Stacks, obviously. So can you like just for my own knowledge, from what I understand, it's supposed to be one for one to be able to on ramp and off ramp from Stacks to Bitcoin L1 easily. Is that the entire thing? Is there more complexity to this product and why it was made and what exactly is SBTC in your own words? I just want to learn from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. Yeah, really, SBTC is a way to use Bitcoin and DeFi, and it was actually designed as an alternative to many of the more centralized products like wrapped Bitcoin that currently exist on the market. And so basically, the way that it works is that anyone can take Bitcoin and deposit it into a smart contract that ultimately mints SBTC one-to-one on the Stacks network. And then once you have SBTC, you have access to fully programmable, faster, cheaper Bitcoin transactions. So you can actually use it in applications, you can use it for payments, and just have a better user experience and importantly, a better developer experience for how you actually build applications around it that can actually take advantage of the properties of Bitcoin.
Okay, that's a very clear explanation. Do you? And I don't know if this is even something in the roadmap or something you're able to talk about. But is there a plan to be able to bridge SBTC over like outside of Stacks in the Bitcoin ecosystem to other places, or is this just between Stacks and Bitcoin, and that's really the end goal of this? Like, what does that roadmap look like?
I could take a stab. I mean, even though, Andre's like the lead product manager, so
Go for it,
should really be deferring. But like, I just in terms of like cross chain, like the priority right now is and will always be building out the Stacks DeFi ecosystem, right? Because there are like unique attributes to the Stacks network that where you really do not have to compromise on Bitcoin security. Like all Stacks transactions settle on Bitcoin, right? And they happen fast in between these 10-minute plus Bitcoin blocks. But once you get to that anchor block, we call it the next Bitcoin block, all of the Stacks transactions settle on Bitcoin and benefit from 100% of Bitcoin's hash power. So in other words, a transaction on Stacks, like an SBTC transaction, which is faster and cheaper, like Andre said, it's also as difficult to reverse as a Bitcoin transaction. So they're just unique things that you can do with this decentralized programmable Bitcoin asset on the Stacks network that you can't do anywhere else. That said, like the leading DeFi ecosystems around the crypto sphere, like Solana, like Sui is a big up and comer, Ethereum, of course, like they are all like, vying to grow the capital and to bring in more capital. And where is most of the capital? It's in Bitcoin, right? Yeah. So like there's a demand from these foundations and from these other ecosystems to pull in programmable Bitcoin assets to grow their DeFi ecosystems. And so we've already announced, collaborations with Solana and Aptos, and there will be more because, there's different types of designs on programmable Bitcoin. There's CBBTC, Coinbase's programmable Bitcoin asset, which is totally centralized. There's wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum, also centralized. You essentially send your Bitcoin to BitGo, right? And they mint you, a corresponding amount of an ERC20 version of Bitcoin. And then ours is more on the decentralized side of the spectrum. And, there's a demand for that, right? So it's pretty exciting. Like I think ultimately right now there's a lot of different Bitcoin assets like emerging and a lot of people kind of coming into this market, which is good. I mean, even though we kind of were one of the creators of this market, this is what you want to see. Like if we weren't successful, if we weren't onto something, we'd have no competition. Yeah. Now there are 80 new Bitcoin L2s like that have been launched in the last 6 months. But basically, eventually we don't know. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but we kind of feel like eventually there will be a shakeout and there will be a small handful of programmable Bitcoin assets. Like you could look at an analogy of like stable coins. Like you might end up with like, a USDC and a USDT or something like that of programmable Bitcoin. And, we are doing everything we can, and we expect that SBTC will be one of those.
Nice, dude. That was an amazing answer, Andre. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I feel like Jonas just covered it.
Jonas absolutely crushed the answer. Yeah,
for sure. Okay, cool. I'm going to ask you kind of a curveball question. So, it seems like SBTC, in your view, is really considered a core part of the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? Like it's helping expand the Bitcoin ecosystem in a way that's still very closely connected and settles onto Bitcoin. And it kind of feels like an expanding part of the Bitcoin stack. If Satoshi were here today, do you think Satoshi would consider SBTC a part of the Bitcoin stack, or would it be considered an altcoin like all the other ones? Because it's not really Bitcoin. It's almost as close as you can get, while making it a little bit more programmable and more, viable for different applications. But do you think you would consider it an altcoin or an actual part of the BTC stack?
yeah. There's a quote from Satoshi early on. Jonas, I might butcher it. Maybe you have it handy, but it's basically like a network that shares compute power with Bitcoin. And it's the second part that it's basically like, but can improve but the gist of it is that it improves its functionality in some way, and I think that is I think really what Stacks has done here, like Stacks has integrated Bitcoin directly into its consensus mechanism so that every transaction ultimately settles onto Bitcoin, and inherit some of the security properties of the Bitcoin network itself. And so, it's, a separate network to extend the functionality and utility of Bitcoin that ultimately, I think, accrues value back to the network by being able to leverage these new applications and use cases.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to claim to know what Satoshi would really think about Stacks, but for us, like you could maybe find the quote by Satoshi and put it in the footnotes or whatever. But he foresaw a world in the evolution of Bitcoin of other networks leveraging Bitcoin's hash power, essentially. And I mean, let's be honest, like the way Bitcoin was designed by Satoshi, it doesn't scale. Right. Yeah. So like if you're going to bring 1 billion people onto Bitcoin, you need to do it in layers. So I think there's a lot that Satoshi would be on board with. But again, I don't want to speak for him.
I'm going to put a link down if I can find the chat on here. I'm going to put a link down that maybe you can include in the show notes with the quote that I was referencing. The exact quote is to be a completely separate network and separate blockchain, yet share CPU power with Bitcoin. So it's a lot of what Stacks is built.
That sounds a lot like what Stacks is. Okay, so he might just be okay with it. It's one of the few. I don't think I've ever asked that question before, but this is probably the only time I can ask that question confidently, because Stacks is so closely connected and really doesn't try to separate itself from Bitcoin. It's not parasitic. It's actually truly very symbiotic and provides like an expansion to what Bitcoin was initially supposed to be able to do, without getting too far away from the core ethos. So without answering the question, I do love the answer to the question, and I will find that quote and we'll make sure we'll throw it onto the screen as you quote it. Okay, last question, and this is something I ask at the end of everyone, and it kind of varies a little bit. Just basic future vision. I don't know if I can really ask you what you see happening in Bitcoin in the next 5 to 10 years, but in terms of Stacks and what it's helped Bitcoin evolve to today, how do you see that expanding and Stacks changing the core operational capabilities of Bitcoin in the near future?
Yeah. Basically, I think that so we saw over the past couple of years an explosion of Bitcoin related networks and Bitcoin backed assets. I think that over the next
Mhm.
5 to 10 years, there's going to be a lot of experimentation around this, but there will ultimately drive some consolidation where the assets that have the most liquidity in these sorts of DeFi use cases are going to really be the dominant assets that are being used. And I think that, similar to what we've seen even kind of in the stablecoin market, that liquidity will probably concentrate just among a handful of assets that have the lion's share. And so ultimately, I think that the Bitcoin DeFi ecosystem is going to follow a similar trajectory. I think that Stacks and SBTC has a great shot at being the dominant Bitcoin asset and Bitcoin network to really unlock this full potential of Bitcoin. And then I think we're going to continue to see more proliferation of Bitcoin into the mainstream. It'll be continue to be more financialized and ultimately kind of underpin the global financial system.
Global economy. So sorry, Jonas, I don't want to interrupt before you have a chance to say your piece, but like that was actually going to be kind of my twist on this question because I think it applies here more than any other guest that I've had. When it comes to stablecoins, I feel like stablecoins have been a very, very, very crucial piece of sustainability, onboarding, offboarding users within various Web3 ecosystems. Do you see that standard changing? I feel like it's a very real possibility that the stablecoin USD pegged standard can shift to really having Bitcoin as the core because things, like networks like Stacks really allow for what was supposed to be like a store of Bitcoin was supposed to be used as a currency for payments. It's kind of just become a store of value at this point. And Stacks is kind of bringing that back to potentially making it usable for payments and for everyday use cases. Do you think Bitcoin could at some point replace the standard of having a USD pegged stablecoin and just Bitcoin becomes the core for
Yeah,
everything?
it's a really interesting question. I think the short answer is that I think that stablecoin liquidity is very important for Bitcoin. Um, and so I think the two are symbiotic. I don't think that there's a competitive nature between the two where eventually one will replace the other. But I think over the long term, we're going to see a lot of stablecoin activity that's happening on Bitcoin rails. And, the two will continue to digitize
Oh,
together.
so more of a merging of the minds as opposed to
Hmm.
competing.
There's
Okay.
a really interesting project, a company, a team called Hermetica in the Stacks ecosystem, and they have a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin, and a lot of early traction. And the stablecoin is called USDH. So it's like, and it's kind of obvious. The principle is, like if you're pegged to the US dollar, you're still getting debased in the long run. You're not really exiting the system. So there's some interesting plays on that. But I agree with Andre. It doesn't matter. What matters more is the liquidity that stablecoins can
Yeah,
enable.
absolutely. It seems like where we are now, people more so want to save in Bitcoin and spend in dollars. So I think that we're going to see a lot of lending apps develop around this. So you can, borrow against your Bitcoin and use stablecoin dollar payments or other sorts of use cases around that. So yeah, I think that we'll see that develop a lot over the next few years.
Yeah. And there's been some interesting debates online recently with, I think Jack Dorsey, and made a comment about how Bitcoin needs to be used as like day to day currency, something like that. I don't want to misquote it, for it to have like real value. And I don't think that's true. Like gold right now has a $21 trillion market cap, and no one's using it to buy coffee. But I do think that like, and kind of it goes back to your original question for us, like I imagine a world where you've got your Bitcoin and cold storage, right? And then you've got a hot wallet where you have a certain amount of that Bitcoin that you're deploying, for yield or for different ways, like just the way you use money like in real life. And it's like at some point you might not even know, like most of it's happening under the hood. You're not thinking about, okay, which of the several different, programmable Bitcoin assets should I use? It's all kind of seamless. And, I think we're on a trajectory towards that sort of dynamic.
Dude, we're all waiting for that day when actually using our on-chain assets in real life use cases is a seamless experience. Because right now, I mean, I've got my little baby ledger, like all of my assets are in different wallets, some of them cold, some of them hot. But I don't honestly use them for anything on a day-to-day basis. When I'm at a crypto conference, sometimes it's just for fun. They're like, oh, you can pay with USDC or USDT or with ETH or with BTC. But it's not like realistically, nobody's really using that on a day-to-day basis, at least not in most of the world. So I think we're all highly anticipating that day when there is no more back and forth and swapping and storing and trying to figure out how can I actually use this stuff on a day-to-day basis. So I love that future vision. I think that's exactly what all of us are waiting for. And it seems to be getting closer and closer and closer every day. Hopefully Stacks will play a big role in making that a reality sooner rather than later. Awesome. Well, before we hop off, first of all, I want to say thank you to both of you for joining and for giving us this insight and just taking part in this conversation. You guys are both awesome guests, very knowledgeable. I'm a big fan of the Stacks ecosystem. I really started learning more about it so that I could speak to you guys knowledgeably. Now I'm genuinely like, you've piqued my interest, and now I'm going to start getting a lot more engaged within the ecosystem. I got to go check out Hermetica. Stablecoins, again, is a very big core part of, I think, what keeps these ecosystems sustainable. So that sounds like a great project. For people that are interested in engaging, interacting with the Stacks ecosystem, building within the Stacks ecosystem, or just want to take part in conversations, can either one or both of you please let me know where people can do that, how they can find you, and where can they go? What can they do?
Yeah, I'd say the best thing would be to do follow Stacks on Twitter. The handle is just @Stacks. Go to stacks.co. And also check out bitcoinismore.org to learn about more opportunities for DeFi opportunities on Bitcoin and earning yield on your Bitcoin.
And follow Munib Ali on Twitter. He's a Bitcoin. He's a Bitcoin visionary, and he's the creator of Stacks. And he's just a bright dude with a lot of interesting things to say.
Dude, awesome. Maybe I can get him on a podcast at some point. That would be, I'm sure he's going to be pretty hard to pin down, but that'll be my next goal, to see if I can get him on one of these episodes and really start peppering him with some questions. Awesome. Guys, genuinely, thank you so much. This has been a great episode. Excited to get this out. Hopefully we can do this again sometime, and maybe we'll meet in real life at some point and have a sit down and do one of these IRL.
Yeah, thanks for having us, man. This was really fun.
That sounds awesome.
Dude,
thanks
absolutely.
again.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. We will talk soon.
Cheers.
Have a good one.